So picture this. You're standing in your kitchen, right? Just pouring a cup of coffee.
Right, a totally normal morning.
Exactly. But suddenly your right hand just goes completely limp.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you drop the mug, it shatters everywhere, and for a terrifying 2 or 3 minutes, your hand is entirely numb and useless.
Just completely dead weight.
Yes. But then a tingling sensation starts. The feeling comes back. You wiggle your fingers, you sweep up the glass, you sit down, and you realize you feel completely fine.
Like nothing ever happened.
Right, you're 100% back to normal. So what do? You probably tell yourself you just slept on your arm funny, or, I don't know, you stood up too fast. You go on with your day.
Which is honestly the most natural human response in the world. I mean,
Yeah.
our brains are practically hardwired to ignore an anomaly if it just resolves itself.
Oh, for sure. Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. We assume that if the symptom disappeared, well, the underlying danger disappeared along with it.
But the reality is, you are actually standing on a medical trapdoor. Today, we are doing a deep dive into a clinical document titled The TIA Warning Shot, Risk Stratification and Clinical Management.
It's a fascinating paper.
It really is. We are looking at a medical event where you feel completely fine, all your outward symptoms have vanished, and yet you might be in the middle of a catastrophic medical emergency.
Yeah, it is arguably one of the most critical warning systems the human body possesses.
Yeah.
And, to ground this, the source material anchors its research around a specific case study that perfectly mirrors your coffee mug scenario.
Right, the guy in the kitchen.
Only in this case, it was a father making tea.
Yeah, so his daughter brought him into the hospital for a major, devastating medical crisis. And while the doctors were trying to figure out what happened, the daughter mentioned this chilling, seemingly minor detail.
It's always a minor detail, right?
Always. 3 weeks prior, he was making tea, and his right hand went numb and useless for a few minutes.
But it passed. He felt fine. They didn't call a doctor. They went back to their afternoon.
Yeah, because the feeling came back. But our mission today is to decode what actually happened in that kitchen 3 weeks earlier.
Right.
We're going to break down the sheer urgency, the diagnosis, and the management of a transient ischemic attack, or a TIA.
And I think it's important to note that the gap between how the general public perceives a TIA and how modern neurology treats it, it's massive.
Completely different worlds.
Exactly. To
Yeah.
really understand why, we have to look at what was physically happening inside that man's brain while he was just, waiting for the feeling to return to his hand.
Okay, so I have heard the term TIA tossed around as a mini stroke, but what is the actual textbook definition of what's happening in the body?
Well, the traditional definition was heavily focused on a stopwatch.
Yeah.
A TIA was classified as a temporary neurological deficit caused by focal ischemia.
Focal ischemia meaning what exactly?
It just means a localized blockage of blood flow. Think of it like a clogged pipe, specifically in the brain, the retina of the eye, or the inner ear.
Okay, so a piece of debris or a clot blocks a pipe, a part of the brain is starved of oxygen and you lose function, but you mentioned a stopwatch earlier.
Yes, it did. Historically, the defining feature of a TIA was that the symptoms lasted less than 24 hours.
Oh, wow, so quite a long window, actually.
Right. If your hand was numb, but you got full function back before the clock hit 24 hours, the medical community said, congratulations, it was just a TIA.
So the assumption was that since the symptoms cleared, the clot must have dissolved in time.
Exactly. They figured no permanent damage was done to the brain tissue.
So the whole diagnosis was purely time-based. It was literally, hey, you beat the clock, you dodged a bullet.
That was the old mindset, yeah. But modern medicine underwent this massive paradigm shift, completely upending that 24-hour rule.
And it was all triggered by a new piece of technology, right?
Yes. Something called diffusion-weighted MRI.
I saw this in the reading, and the mechanics of it are just fascinating. How does this specific type of MRI change the game so drastically?
Well, standard imaging looks at the basic structure of the brain. But diffusion-weighted MRI, it actually tracks the microscopic movement of water molecules inside the tissue.
Wait, really? Just water molecules?
Yeah. When a part of the brain is starved of blood, even for a very short time, those specific brain cells lose their energy supply.
Okay.
And the tiny pumps that regulate sodium and potassium inside the cell, they fail.
Because they don't have the oxygen to keep the pumps running, right?
Exactly. So when those pumps fail, water rushes into the cells, and the cells swell up. The water is trapped, It can't diffuse or move around normally anymore.
Oh, I see.
And the diffusion-weighted MRI is hypersensitive to this trapped water.
Hmm.
So it literally makes those dying Swirnan cells light up brightly on the scan.
Wow, so it catches the damage at a cellular level.
Yeah.
What did doctors see when they started putting TIA patients, people who beat the 24-hour clock and felt totally fine, into these new MRI machines?
They saw dead tissue.
That is terrifying.
It really is. They found that in a huge percentage of cases, even when a patient's outward symptoms fully resolved in just 20 or 30 minutes, the MRI lit up. There was visible infarction.
And infarction means?
Infarction means irreversible tissue death.
So the patient is sitting on the exam table, smiling, moving their hand normally, speaking perfectly, but the scan is actively showing dead brain cells.
Yes. The brain is remarkably adaptable. Sometimes it can reroute function or compensate for a tiny area of damage, which is why the patient feels normal again.
Right, the outward symptoms go away.
But the tissue still died. Because of this, the medical field shifted from a time-based definition to a tissue-based definition.
Meaning the clock doesn't matter anymore.
It doesn't. Under the modern criteria, if you have a brief episode of numbness and it clears up in 10 minutes, but the MRI shows a new lesion of dead tissue, well, it's no longer classified as a TIA.
What is it then?
It is a full-blown stroke.
I really want you, the listener, to just let that sink in because it completely reframes how we think about our bodies.
It really does.
It's like waking up to your smoke alarm blaring, right? You run into the kitchen, the alarm stops, the smoke clears, and you think, oh, false alarm, no fire.
Right, you just go back to bed.
But this modern MRI is the equivalent of walking into that kitchen, flipping on the lights, and finding actual physical scorch marks permanently burned into your cabinets.
That is the perfect way to look at it. The scorch marks are the infarction. If you find scorch marks, you don't pat yourself on the back for a false alarm.
No.
You recognize that a fire occurred in your house.
And if you had a fire in your house, you wouldn't just go back to sleep. Which leads us to the really terrifying statistics in this deep dive, because the most dangerous trap you can fall into is feeling relief.
It is a deadly illusion. If you have a TIA, meaning there was a temporary blockage, the statistics show that you are in immediate, severe danger.
This source material lays this out aggressively.
It does. About 1 in 3 untreated TIA patients will go on to have a major stroke within 5 years.
1 in 3. Those are horrifying odds.
It gets worse, actually. It accelerates. 1 in 10 will have a stroke within just 3 months.
Wow.
And if we isolate the group of patients who do eventually suffer a subsequent stroke, the timeline compresses drastically. Of those patients, 21% have their major stroke within a single month of the first warning shot.
Single month.
And 51% have it within a year.
But the most alarming statistic from the case files, the detail that really demands we pay attention to this, is what they call the 48-hour vault.
Right, the critical window.
In one major clinical series, of all the major strokes that follow a TIA, half of them occurred within 48 hours of the initial symptom.
Half of them. Just think about our father making tea.
Yeah, his hand went numb on Tuesday. By Thursday, he is in the highest risk window for a catastrophic, life-altering stroke. But why is that window so narrow?
That's the key question.
Right, like, if the clot dissolved and the blood is flowing again, why is the risk of a massive stroke so incredibly high in the next 2 days?
Because the underlying environment that created the clot hasn't changed at all. Think of the inside of an artery like a smooth, Teflon-coated pipe.
Okay, got it.
Over time, plaque builds up. That plaque can rupture, creating a jagged, sticky mess inside the pipe. A clot forms on that sticky rupture, breaks off, and blocks the brain. That was a TIA.
Right, that's the warning shot.
But even after that specific clot breaks up, you still have a jagged, sticky, ruptured plaque sitting right there in the artery.
Oh man, so the damage is still there.
It is basically a highly active crime scene. The body's clotting system is in overdrive trying to heal the rupture, meaning second, much larger clot is highly likely to form in that exact same spot within hours or days.
Which is why ignoring it is so fatal. The pipe is still ragged. And to make matters worse, the brain isn't even the only organ in the crosshairs here.
No, it's really a systemic issue. Cardiac events are actually the leading cause of death following a TIA.
Wait, really? Heart issues?
Yeah. Patients face a 5 to 6% annual mortality rate, and the vast majority of those deaths are from myocardial infarctions, heart attacks.
I suppose that makes terrible logical sense. If the vascular plumbing in your neck and brain is heavily rusted and throwing off debris, while the plumbing supplying your heart is almost certainly in the same state of decay.
Exactly. The TIA is just the body's loudest alarm bell for a system-wide vascular collapse.
So put yourself in the shoes of an emergency room doctor. A patient walks in and says, "My hand went numb yesterday, but I feel fine now."
A very common scenario.
And we know that patient might have less than 48 hours before a massive stroke. How does the doctor figure out just how immediate the danger is?
They use a bedside risk stratification tool called the ABCD2 score.
ABCD2.
Right. It takes about 30 seconds to calculate, and it assigns points based on specific risk factors to determine if the patient needs immediate hospital admission.
Okay, let's break down that acronym. What is the ABCD2 score actually measuring?
So A is for age, specifically being over 60. B is for blood pressure, notably if it is higher than 140/90.
Let's pause on blood pressure for a second.
Right.
Why does high blood pressure accelerate the immediate stroke risk so much?
It comes back to the plumbing again. High blood pressure is like, well, it's like blasting a fire hose through a frail garden hose.
Yikes.
Yeah. That sheer force damages the inner lining of the arteries, making them more susceptible to those plaque ruptures we talked about. And if there is already a fragile clot forming, that high pressure flow is much more likely to dislodge it and send it shooting straight up into the brain.
Okay, so that's age and blood pressure. What is the C?
C stands for clinical features. You get points if you have unilateral weakness on one side or speech impairment.
Makes sense.
D is for duration of symptoms. An episode lasting longer than 60 minutes scores higher than one lasting 10 minutes. And the final D, or the 2 in the acronym, is for diabetes.
Why diabetes?
Because chronically high blood sugar physically damages the blood vessels over time.
Just structurally ruins them.
Exactly. It essentially creates an environment where red blood cells become stiffer and stickier. It degrades the vascular walls, making the formation of atherosclerotic plaque much more aggressive.
Wow.
So a diabetic patient with a recent TIA has a much more compromised plumbing system overall.
So the doctor tallies this up. And if the score hits a 4 or higher out of 7, the source material states this indicates a moderate to high stroke risk.
Yes, you don't send that patient home with a pat on the back. They are admitted to the hospital immediately.
Because they are in the danger zone. But while they are evaluating the risk, they also have to locate the physical blockage, right?
Right. They map the brain's clumbing based entirely on the patient's symptoms. The vascular system of the brain is divided into 2 main territories: the carotid circulation and the vertebrobasilar circulation.
Essentially the front of the house plumbing versus the back of the house plumbing.
That is a great way to visualize it. The carotid arteries are the big ones in the front of your neck. They supply the front and sides of the brain, the cerebral hemispheres. If a clot hits the carotid territory, you see very distinct clinical features, usually involving contralateral deficits.
Contralateral meaning the symptom happens on the opposite side of the body from where the brain damage is. Why does it cross over like that?
It's a fascinating quirk of human anatomy, actually. The nerve fibers traveling from the motor cortex in your brain down to your body, they actually cross the midline. They literally switch sides at the base of the brainstem.
Oh, wow.
So if the left carotid artery gets blocked, the left side of the brain suffers. But because of that crossover, it is the right hand that goes numb and useless.
Just like the father making tea. Left brain blockage, right hand goes numb.
I read about another carotid symptom in the source material, and it honestly sounds like something out of a horror movie.
Oh, you're talking about amaurosis fugax.
Yes, the medical term was amaurosis fugax.
Yeah, transient monocular visual loss. It is a highly specific, very alarming symptom of a carotid territory, TIA. The way the case file described it really stuck with me. It isn't just your vision getting blurry. Patients describe it literally like a window shade or a dark curtain being physically pulled down from top to bottom over just one eye.
Yeah.
The world goes entirely black in that eye for a couple of minutes, and then the curtain slowly rolls back up.
You can imagine the sheer panic that induces. But from a clinical perspective, that falling curtain is a glaring neon sign pointing directly to the carotid artery on that same side. The artery supplying the eye itself is briefly choked off.
So that is the carotid, the front plumbing. What about the back of the house? The vertebrobasilar circulation.
Right, so the vertebrobasilar system supplies the back of the brain stem, and the cerebellum. These areas control highly complex integrated functions like equilibrium, coordination and vital life support.
The really foundational stuff.
Exactly. So a blockage here doesn't just cause a simple numbness in one hand, it causes bilateral or shifting weakness, meaning it might affect both sides of the body at once, or shift from left to right.
And it causes visual field loss, but not the single eye curtain effect we just talked about.
Correct. But there is a massive caveat when diagnosing vertebrobasilar TIAs. And this is crucial for emergency room doctors. Isolated symptoms do not count.
Meaning, if you just have one symptom, it isn't a TIA.
Right. If a patient comes in with isolated vertigo, just severe dizziness, or isolated diplopia, which is double vision, or even isolated slurred speech, those do not automatically equal a TIA.
I found this really interesting because if you understand the anatomy, it makes perfect sense. The brainstem is the grand central station for your body's most basic systems.
Right?
If you just get dizzy, well, it could be dehydration, it could be low blood sugar, it could be an inner ear infection. But if you get dizzy, you suddenly have double vision. ND, you can't swallow that clustering of symptoms is what tells the doctor, okay, a major central pipe in the brainstem just clogged.
The clustering is the key. It confirms the vascular origin. A blocked pipe in that area is going to take out multiple systems simultaneously, not just one.
Which transitions us to a really difficult part of the doctor's job. Because the symptoms of a TIA are so specific, they have to constantly guard against the imposter.
Same mimics, yes.
Conditions that look exactly like a terrifying stroke, but operate under totally different biological rules.
Misdiagnosing an imposter as a TIA can lead to aggressive blood-thinning treatments that the patient absolutely doesn't need. Or worse, missing a totally different underlying disease.
Like what?
Well, the basic rule-outs are things like simple fainting, generalized weakness, or just being confused. But the more complex imposters often come down to how the symptoms present over time.
Let's talk about symptom migration.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm sitting here and I feel a tingling in my fingertips. Then, over the next 15 minutes, that tingling slowly creeps up my forearm, into my bicep, up to my shoulder, and finally into my jaw.
Okay.
Does that slow marching sensation mean I am having a TIA?
No. That march of symptoms is highly uncharacteristic of a TIA. It is much more indicative of a focal seizure or a complex migraine.
Because a TIA is a plumbing problem. If you block a pipe, the water stops immediately. The whole room goes dark at once. But a seizure is an electrical problem.
That is a brilliant distinction, actually. A seizure or a migraine aura involves abnormal electrical activity that slowly spreads across the surface of the brain.
Like a wave.
Exactly. As that electrical wave literally physically moves millimeter by millimeter across the motor cortex, the corresponding physical symptoms slowly march up your arm. Plumbing is sudden and static. Electricity spreads and marches.
That is such a clear way to differentiate them. The source material also highlighted two specific clinical syndromes that mimic a TIA. The first one is transient global amnesia, or TGA.
Oh, yes.
And the mechanics of this sound deeply distressing.
TGA is a profound, reversible memory loss. The patient is completely awake, alert, and active. They have absolutely no weakness. They can walk, talk, and drive.
But they forget everything.
They lose the ability to form new memories. So they get stuck in a neurological loop, asking the exact same questions over and over again, completely unaware that they just asked them 2 minutes ago.
Honestly, if I watched a family member do that out of nowhere, I would immediately assume they were having a massive stroke.
Any family member would.
Yeah.
But here's a fascinating twist. Unlike a true TIA, transient global amnesia is generally benign.
Wait, how can a total memory wipe be benign?
Because it isn't usually caused by a ragged, stroke-inducing plaque in a major artery. The exact mechanism of TGA is still debated, but it is often linked to temporary venous congestion.
Venous congestion.
Yeah, just a brief backup of blood flow in the hippocampus, which is the brain's memory center. The hippocampus is incredibly sensitive to metabolic stress.
Okay, so it just gets overwhelmed.
Right. Once the stress resolves, the memory function reboots. It doesn't leave the scorch marks of dead tissue, and it doesn't predict a massive stroke in the next 48 hours.
So it's an incredibly dramatic false alarm.
Exactly.
What is the second imposter?
Drop attacks.
That sounds aggressive.
It is sudden and catastrophic. A drop attack is a sudden total loss of muscle tone. The patient simply collapses to the floor.
Wow.
But, crucially, they do not lose consciousness. Their mind is perfectly clear as they fall.
Okay, wait. A sudden loss of full-body muscle tone, wouldn't that point straight back to the brainstem, the vertebrobasilar circulation we just talked about?
For a very long time, the medical community assumed exactly that. They grouped drop attacks right under vertebrobasilar TIAs.
But that changed.
It did. Modern clinical observation has largely disproven that link. We now know that isolated drop attacks are rarely vascular.
So if it isn't a blocked pipe in the back of the brain, what is severing the puppet strings, so to speak?
It is often cardiac syncope.
Meaning the heart.
Yes, meaning the heart rhythm suddenly drops so low it can't maintain pressure, or alternatively, it's an inner ear pathology. The text specifically notes Tumarkin's otolithic crises.
Tumarkin's otolithic crises, what is happening there?
It is mechanical failure in the inner ear. The otoliths are tiny calcium carbonate crystals in your ear that sense gravity and linear acceleration.
Okay.
If those crystals shift abnormally, they send a massive instantaneous false signal to the brainstem that you are falling.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the brainstem reflexively removes all extensor muscle tone to brace for impact, and you instantly collapse.
So your ear tricks your brain into thinking you are in free fall, and your body just hits the deck.
Pretty much.
That is incredible. A microscopic crystal in the ear, a skipped heartbeat, or a blocked artery can all drop a human being to the floor.
Which is why the physician at the bedside cannot afford to make assumptions. They have to play high-stakes detective.
Right. They have to calculate the ABCD2 score, map the precise clustering of symptoms, rule out the marching electrical problems, and decide if the patient is sitting on a 48-hour time bomb.
A time bomb that brings us right back to the kitchen, where this deep dive started.
The father making tea.
Exactly.
We can see the entire picture now. When his right hand went numb and useless, it was a textbook, one-sided sensory and motor deficit. It was a classic carotid territory TIA.
It wasn't a glitch, and it wasn't an imposter.
It was the ultimate warning shot. A ragged piece of plaque in his carotid artery threw off a clot. It briefly lodged in his brain, starved the tissue, and then washed away.
But the scorch marks were left behind. And more importantly, the ragged plaque was still sitting in his neck, quietly prepping the next, much larger clot.
He missed the 48-hour vault. He missed the 3-week window. The smoke alarm blared. Everyone sat down. And whatever medical crisis ultimately brought him to the hospital 3 weeks later, well, it was just the fire finally burning the house down.
The hardest lesson of the TIA is that the body is a closed system. It doesn't manufacture symptoms for no reason.
Right.
It gave him a brief, terrifying glimpse of a structural failure. Recognizing that glimpse is the only way to intervene before the damage becomes permanent.
Because feeling better does not mean the danger is gone. The trapdoor is still there. If you take one single thing away from the source material today, let it be that.
Absolutely.
Do not let the relief of a passing symptom convince you to ignore the threat.
It is an emergency that simply masquerades as a recovery.
Which leaves you with a really profound, somewhat haunting thought to mull over. If our bodies are capable of giving us these incredibly narrow, fleeting windows to intervene in a catastrophic physical collapse, it makes you wonder,
Yeah.
what other subtle, easily dismissed warning shots in our daily lives, whether they're physical exhaustion, emotional burnout, or even tiny cracks in our relationships, are we choosing to ignore every single day simply because the pain temporarily went away?